Hi everyone, my name's Dan Draper and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe and turn on all notifications to keep up to date with the content that I'm going to be putting out, including my podcast. Let's get into the videos. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Dan Draper podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Today I have an incredible guest with such a unique and amazing story about his life that I'm so excited to get him on the show. So Adam, would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me, Dan. It's a pleasure to be doing this for you. I'm Adam Lind. I'm 28 years old. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today to share a bit of insight and talk to you, really.
Mate, I'm so happy that we connected. And we actually connected through Alex, didn't we? My cousin who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. Because you guys knew each other previously, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we knew of each other. We went to the same school. And then when I was starting my podcast, it was actually his girlfriend that told me about his story. And after
Mm.
listening to his story, I wanted to get him on my podcast and he wanted me on his. And I just think it's nice, this kind of circuit we've got going on, particularly not to be gender specific, but of males sharing their vulnerabilities and sharing their stories. It's something I feel really passionate about. So then when I heard your pod and what you were doing, it felt like something I really wanted to get involved in.
Oh, thank you so much, man. And you're so right there. It's we're building out a circle of, and like you said, not being gender specific, but a circle of men that are able to talk about it. Because as we know, men are shit at talking about mental health a lot of the time. So it's great that more men are coming forward and talking about it, and that we can create these groups and little cliques, if you like, of male mental health. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on. How's things? How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. I can't complain, to be honest. It's been quite a reflective time, as it has been for many people, but also like a time of progression for myself, and somewhat started to feel guilty for like having a nice time during the midst of everything going on. But I think
Yeah.
that's a really strange thing, how like we're quick to feel guilt about our kind of success, but when it's like our down points, we're really happy to share them and let everyone know. So I'm quietly working with the fact that yeah, I actually feel very blessed at the moment. So yeah, can't complain. Living on my boat, which I'm sure we'll divulge a bit later.
Yeah, I am so excited to talk about that because that's always been a little bit of a dream for me. But yeah, we'll come on to that later. So, mate, again, thank you so much for coming on. Let's take it right back to the beginning, as we do with every episode, and let's talk about where your struggles may have started with mental health.
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting one to pinpoint because growing up, I guess especially pre-teen ages, you're never going to see these like mental health issues. But I was born into a loving family. Both my mum, I was living with my mum, my dad, and my sister, all very loving to me. Unbeknown to me at the time, my dad was an alcoholic. He'd been an alcoholic since he was like 17, due to this, well, partly due to this basic car crash that he had that had tilted part of his brain, and the doctors believed that this led to some kind of neurological difference that led him to the road of addiction. Whether that's fact or whether that was kind of like a nice story to me is kind of by the by. But yeah, like I've got good memories of childhood, but I also have a lot of quite tainted memories of like locking myself in a downstairs toilet and just like some kind of slightly traumatic stuff, I guess, now when I reflect on it. And this led into, I guess, up to the point where I was 17, where my father unfortunately died, which in a really weird way, when
Mm,
I look back on that experience now, I'm able to say it's the experience I'm most grateful for in my life. Not necessarily saying I'm happy that he passed away, but I believe that I would not have the mindset or be on the path I'm on now if that experience didn't happen to me at the age where I guess a lot of people are
mm,
more thinking about, nightclubs and this and that. I was faced with this very traumatic experience, but it really propelled my brain and my mind. At the time, I probably wasn't ready for it, to be honest, but looking back, it's been able to
yeah.
shape exactly who I am today. Um, which is kind of like a soft overview, but yeah, it's a really interesting one. growing up with an alcoholic father has its challenges. They got divorced when I was about 3, so we lived separately. But just small things now, like I've been reflecting on it recently and being at school, like being in your maths class, age like 14, and just getting like 30 missed calls on your phone and voicemails from like this drunk guy. But at the time, I knew he was different, but it's hard to compare your circumstance to others. I don't think I was as much of a sharer then as I am now. So I definitely didn't keep everything in, but I definitely didn't necessarily reach out to other people to let them know what was going on. But yeah, that's kind of in short, I guess, where my road into mental health began.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about your dad, and again, I know that it was years ago, but I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of your dad. But with your dad, and you kind of touched on it. Can you tell us how it was growing up with an alcoholic father?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was really interesting because I always knew there was something different about him. I always knew that, like, my friends weren't always allowed to come over to his house, but I never really knew why. And I think I was age 11, and I remember this really specific time where like every other week or every week, my sister and I would go over to my dad's flat. And like it was
Mm,
always like a strange place there, a strange energy. I couldn't read it as energy at the time, but it was just something different about it. And this one time when I was 11, my mum said, "Oh, I'm going to come up as well with you." And I was like, "That's weird. Like 10 years you've been divorced, you've been coming here, you never come up to the flat." So she came up and we're all sitting around in this kind of official space. And they just said to me, look, they handed me a load of books and a load of papers, and basically said, look, your dad's an alcoholic. He has been since before you were born. Here's some books you can read about, what it's like to live as a alcoholic's child. And I was a bit like, I don't know, it was really strange at first because it was nice to have a label for what I knew he was always different, but I didn't know what it was. But then also I was quite naive. This is
mm,
for me one of the problems with alcoholism because I was 11, but say my mum would have a glass of wine, my sister was 18, she would always be laughing about how she was going out clubbing with her friends and drinking. So I was a bit like an alcoholic, like just kind of stop drinking. And this is, like I say, the problem with
mm,
alcoholism because it's not seen as the disease or the illness or the addiction that say if he was a heroin addict, it's a lot easier for people to relate because it's not an illegal substance. People feel like it's a bit like, it's like a not it's not as serious as the other addictions if it's cocaine or heroin or something like that. So I think that's something I struggled with. But in terms of practicalities, yeah, it was just always that feeling, I guess, of feeling different. And like my dad, I'd want to like hide him. And I kind of regret that in a way. But I remember if sometimes we'd be
mm,
out walking up the street, I really wouldn't want any friends to see me. I really wouldn't want anyone to see me. Because the problem, I'd say more so with the alcoholism, is you develop something called agoraphobia, which I don't know if you know, but it's basically the fear of
right.
going out. So because after drinking so much alcohol for so long, it plays such a part on the neurology of your brain, he would then not want to like open the windows or take the rubbish out, which then leads to, living in squalor and this kind of all the adverse effects that come with it. So like turning up at his flat and just like the stench and the dirt, but kind of still wanting to be there because he's your dad. But the older you get, the more you're like, I definitely started to resent it. I was like, I'm now 15. I'd rather be out with my friends than sitting in this smelly flat. And you're calling me all day, at school drunk. And there was definitely a lot of resentment there. And I always actually say that the closest I ever felt to him was the 8 weeks before he died, because we kind of gave him an intervention where my mum, who was always
Right.
very supportive of him, even after she was remarried, they turned up at his flat and they said, "Look, you need to go to hospital because you're not okay. Like you're not leaving this place. It's disgusting,
Mm,
etc." And basically said to my mum and sister, "I'll only go if both my kids are here." So I'm at school at this point. I get a call saying you need to leave school. You need to get a taxi to your dad's flat to come in this ambulance. And I was just like, "What the is going on?" Like it was looking back now, it doesn't sound particularly real actually to say it out loud. So I remember getting a taxi to my dad's flat. We get in this ambulance, we go there, and they didn't want to keep him in, but we tell them a bit more about why he needs to be kept in. And they described it as they spent 8 weeks juicing him, like literally juicing the alcohol from his veins. in the hope that he would then kind of start this new path. And he would say every day as he got sober there how sorry he was and how this was going to be it. He was going to start a new life. During while he was there, a friend and I would go after school and we started to like redecorate his flat because it was so disgusting. Like chuck everything away,
Mm.
repaint, new bed, etc. And I would go to the hospital every day to see him. And unfortunately, as his body was so weak from all of the alcohol during that time, he caught an infection and he died in hospital, um, which obviously
Right.
was like soul destroying in one respect because, he claimed that this was going to be his new life. But in the same breath, I do feel
Mm.
grateful that I had those 8 weeks with him where I could actually, I guess, learn a bit more about him and talk to him when he was sober. Like it was such a rarity, and we could laugh and we could kind of enjoy the situation to some degree. Um, yeah, and
Mm.
that's I guess where once he passed was where I really came into the mental health world because I was now faced with my emotions more than I was before, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And again, mate, I can only send my condolences for all those years ago about what happened. So, one thing that I did want to ask you was, how did you cope with the grief of losing your dad at such a young age, and obviously the way that you lost your dad as well?
Yeah, I think grief is such an interesting topic, and so is death. Like I think I spoke to you when we spoke last week. Like death is such a taboo, and it always has been. And I'd lost like all four of my grandparents and an uncle by the age of like 8. So like I remember even being so young and kind of just being like, where are they? Like I know they're dead, but like where actually are they? So even when I look back at these patterns of myself now, I can tell I always had quite an overactive mind. I would question things quite a lot. And I think I suppressed a lot of these feelings. But when I was trying to grieve my dad, it was kind of this same thing as like, okay, I know his body's kind of disappeared, but at this stage, I knew nothing about like religion or spirituality or whatever you want to call it. I had nothing to identify death with. And this is, I think, what hit me hardest than losing my dad was more just coping with death, and then kind of understanding that like, oh gosh, this is actually also going to happen to my mum one day and also to me one day, and like, where do I go? And it became this real outer body fear and anxiety, especially at such a young age. And it really brought up a lot of suppressed emotion, like I say, because these didn't feel like new feelings. It was like I'd been having these feelings since I was like 6 or 7 years old, but I'd never placed them as say like death anxiety or fear of death. And then losing my dad at an age of 17, where I was a bit more understanding of the world. I'd say this was actually harder for me, I think, than coping with my dad going, because it's a really, I'm not going to say horrible thing to say, but in some ways, my dad going eased my life a bit. Like, and it took me years to say
Mm.
that, but it's sometimes you just have to face the harsh reality. I was no longer getting drunk phone calls at school. I was no longer like having to hide him from everyone else. Like he was a good man, don't get me wrong. He was never aggressive. He loved me and my sister to bits. Of course, I'd love to have him around now, but the processing of not having a dad was easier than it was processing death itself, I think.
Yeah, and I think that it's really powerful what you were saying there about tapping into your emotions and how your anxieties were then playing, because if you were to lose someone at any age, it's horrendous. But with the fact that you were doing it in your teens and you've got all of these, hormones that are flying at you as well, and you're trying to find who you are as a man and how you're able to grow up and things like that, that must have been a really defining moment for you to really have that big, horrendous milestone in your life, and then how you then moved on from it.
Yeah, I did. And I guess before that, and what propelled me into kind of university and these things is one way that I dealt with my grief. I remember lying in bed and you'd be crying, whether it's because you're scared of death or your dad or whatever it is you're crying about. And I was just like, "Do you know what? I'm sick of this. Like, I'm sick of just lying here crying. Let's imagine right now you're on a beach with your friends, having a drink, having a smoke, whatever your happy place is." And I'd suddenly feel like the serotonin in my body changed. Like I actually my
Mm.
body felt different when I was changing my thought pattern. And I was like, oh my God, like if I just start to think more happy, positive thoughts, like I actually feel happier. I was like, this is amazing. And it like propelled me into this new mindset where like every day, like I'd get upset or anxious about something and I'd be like, hold on, go back to that beach. Ah, how nice is it here? And I'd feel happy again. And I felt like I'd kind of woken up and I'd had this realization that in my mind nobody else has had. So I coined this phrase of like positivity is the key to happiness. And I started to tell anyone that would listen, I was like, like whenever you're upset, just think positive and you'll be happy. And like people like kind of thought I was going a bit crazy with it. I was like, nobody's listening. So I went to the tattoo parlor and I got a tattoo here across my arm that says positivity is the key to happiness. I was like,
Oh,
that's it. If I
brilliant.
stamp it on me, then people will know that I'm being serious. Years later, which I guess we'll go into, I realized you shouldn't always think positive to be happy. But I think this was my first
Yeah.
inkling, one, into learning that I have control over my mind. However bad things get, you have control over your mind. Like you can source advice from therapists, other people, that is all great. But at the end of the day, it's you that is changing your mind and your thought patterns. And also that I can create my own reality. Like if my reality is to sit and squalor about my dad, or my reality is to look past that and imagine better things, that is me choosing this. Um, and like obviously some
Yeah.
people, there's no time on grief. You can wallow in grief for a really long time, and I'm not saying it's bad. The only valid piece of advice I ever say I was given for grief is that time is the only healer, and that is so true in any situation. Like, don't try and fast track your emotions because
Mhm.
time is the only thing that will heal it. But whilst you're waiting for that time, there are practical implications you can make. And this applies to everything, whether you've lost your job, you've had an argument with your partner, it doesn't have to be grand things. You are in control of how you react to these situations. And I think that's a message that has helped me so much, and I
Mhm.
always like to share to people, because we can often feel like we're not in control of our mind and that it's everything's happening to us. And it's easy to fall into this victim mentality of this is happening to me. And it's like, no, things are just happening. You are there, and how you react to them is actually your choice when you take a step back. Sorry, that's just something I really wanted to share.
No, mate. Honestly, it's so good, and it's so important that you said that because I think that that's one of the big things. Because when I lost the people in my life that I did, and especially in such a quick succession as well, I like you. I went into my own little reality. I didn't know who I was really. I didn't know what I was about. I was in a bubble of grieving for my cousin. I was in a bubble of grieving for my nan and other family members and things like that. And I didn't really know how to process it. I didn't really know what to do with myself. So I just kind of was just for me, just in this huge reality of grief. And it only took me, it took me quite a few months to come out of it. It took me a few months to then see that there was a positive message that came out of it. So I think that's majorly important, mate. And like we were saying earlier, when you took this and you took your experiences from the grief and the loss and everything that you made in your own realities, you then went off to university. So do you want to tell us a little bit about university and what happened kind of there as well?
Yeah, I think for me, university was a really like pinnacle time where I felt like I was kind of at my peak of who I was. But then in reflection, actually, a lot of it was actually fueled by a lot of insecurities. So I went to university more again because I knew I wasn't ready to get a job, or like I wasn't cut out to just join society. To be honest, I went to university to delay and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And again, on this path, of creating my own reality and realizing that my dad's gone now, he's had his time, and I've accepted that I've got a limited time in my body as well. So I'm going to do within respect to other people whatever I want with it. And I'd heard you go to uni, you live with your friends, and you go out partying. And I was like, wow, that or get a job in central London is kind of a no-brainer. So I moved up to Leeds, and I guess the most pinnacle thing that happened to me there was a friend and I started a business together where we started a music brand and we were running kind of festivals and nightclub events. And we just started it as a bit of a joke from our bedroom, but it grew quite exponentially, kind of turned into a full-time job for the two of us. And we'd even laugh, like we'd host these events and sell out like 1,000 capacity venues. And we'd still just go home after and just laugh at like, how are we doing this? Like we felt like massive imposter syndrome, massive like out of our depth, like how have we created this? But with that kind of electronic music lifestyle, naturally comes a lot of like drug taking and things like this. And it's not something I regret because it's not like I was a drug addict or anything. To have altered states of consciousness in this way, maybe not in the way I was doing it, but in like the research that's coming through now in like psychedelic therapy, especially in like war veterans and soldiers, like a very close friend of mine who's a psychedelic researcher who's now finally in the UK able to open the first psychedelic research center, which is like safely administered plant medicine to help, like I say, war veterans get over PTSD and things like this. I do generally believe my experience allowed me to kind of access all different parts of my brain that then led me to my thought patterns today. But I think the part that I wasn't so comfortable with was, I was like living out this dream of running parties. Everyone knew who I was. I lived in Leeds. People would like nickname me like Mr. Leeds. Like my ego was so big and everything was about like validation, social validation, like getting into free to every nightclub, never paying for a drink in a nightclub, like things that on the surface sound really cool. But with this social pressure, uncovered
Mm.
all these insecurities in myself. Like I was quite overweight. I was going bald on the top of my head at like 18. Wouldn't okay, I'm actually wearing a hat now, but I'm happy not to. But like wouldn't go to a nightclub without wearing a hat on my head. Wouldn't go to a nightclub without wearing a hat
Yeah.
on my head because I was embarrassed that I was going bald. All these things. And I feel like I was covering up my insecurities through like, yeah, just partying more, like just making myself socially validated, which I think a lot of people do at university. But I guess it wasn't until after university that I was able to back and just realize it's all smoke and mirrors. Like
Mm.
it was fun, but it really can be a really toxic environment when you're just seeking social validation from other people.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I want to say is we don't condone the use of drugs, definitely, with that one. But yeah, I think that you're right, mate. I mean, I never went to university, and I went for Freshers Week. I went for my mate's Freshers Week. That was wild, but that was that was brilliant. But I think you're right. You know, when you go out, like in when you go out in town and you know a lot of people within the town, whether it's through sports or whether it's through nights out, or like myself, I was a musician, so I played quite a few gigs and pubs around there, so you get to know the locals or the landlords or things like that. You do have that bit of, oh my god, like there's this thing that and again, it's the imposter syndrome for me when I was going out and doing it, because it was that I felt like I needed to know everybody, or that everyone also then needed to know me as well, and it was such a strange
Mm.
feeling. And in the end, I just went, "You're just a drummer who's getting paid like 70 quid a night to go play a gig to entertain people. Take that part of it. Don't think about all the other shit that's coming on with it. Like, just think about it." And it's such a strange thing. So it's so awesome to hear you say that about the pressures of the industry, and how things can kind of progress forward with that, because I'm starting now to move into another industry that is, if I get where I want to go with it, and fingers crossed, touching wood, I do, is going to be very much media orientated, and people are going to be watching and scrutinizing and things like that, so there's a lot of pressure. So yeah, I'm kind of setting myself up for that one.
For sure, but I think you're aware of it, and like the whole key to stuff like this is awareness. Like when you go into any stage of your life with awareness, then you can kind of look out for the signs. And like really,
Mm,
we're all living out through our ego, but like the real kind of aim, if you look at certain texts, is to kind of kill the ego or suppress the ego, because it's what leads us to constantly compare ourselves to others, which is like the biggest curse in humanity and one that I'm so guilty of. And the other is like you said, looking for social validation. But we live in a society now where we monitor ourselves by how many likes we get on an Instagram post. So like as much as
mm.
myself included, like I run an Instagram blog, and as much as I don't want to look for social validation, I am checking how many likes my Instagram post got. So like we were saying earlier, we can know all the answers, but I'm no like higher power. Like I'm just as guilty as them as everyone else. But I like to share for others in the hope
Yeah.
that between us all we can kind of reach this understanding of what's really important.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And then just tell us about, you were at university, and then you decided to go to traveling. Now tell us about this story, because I absolutely love this. I love every part of it.
So I guess the most impactful and special part about me going to university was that I met my now fiance Lauren, who I've been with for 8 years. And when I first met her, I was so drawn to her because she was like just different, like a bit wild, a bit outside the box, like way quirkier than anyone that grew up in my area. And she'd always told me she wanted to travel. And again, uni was coming to an end. I decided I didn't want to run this events party anymore because of what I've said, smoke and mirrors, and just it wasn't serving me. So again, I had two choices. Do I leave Leeds, where I've lived for 6 years and studied, and get a job, or do I travel the world? So again, I thought I'd delay a job for even longer, which is now 10 years later, and I'm still kind of delaying it. Well, I've got my own business, but yeah. Um, and yeah, and she had this idea. She'd always wanted to go to Australia or to Fiji or Thailand or like a lot of the places that other people go. Not that there's anything wrong with them. And I was just, we were looking on a map and I was just like to her, isn't it weird that we're here in England and like Thailand and Australia's here? Like, what about all this stuff in between? Like, it seemed so untouched, yet so close. So we
Mm,
kind of had this idea that we would travel to India as an end goal, but we would travel by land. And to take it one step further, we started looking into like low budget travel and just how people do it. And we, one way or another, decided we wanted to hitchhike from Europe. The starting point was going to be Amsterdam, from Amsterdam to India without using any trains, buses, planes, etc., just with our thumbs basically. And we wanted to do it for a range of reasons. Like, okay, yeah, the cost was a main factor, but also just we just wanted to go and experience people. Like, I think I've been embedded in me.
mm,
I've always had some kind of anthropology interest in like social norms and people. And I'd been away to hostels a few times and I'd always enjoyed it, but I kind of felt everyone's there trying to explore this same town that none of us are from. There was almost some kind of disconnect.
yeah.
So yeah, we left. We'd never hitchhiked before. We'd never experienced this before. We just had our tent in our bags, and we yeah had an amazing time. We were traveling in total for 6 years. There's countless stories I can tell, but that's basically the basis of it.
Yeah. And did you make it?
We made it hitchhiking wise, we made it to the border of Iran. We made it to the east of Turkey, and then we couldn't get a visa for Pakistan. And at this point, we've been on the road for
Mm.
I think 3 years. And to be honest, we were tired. Like we were really tired. We must have had like over 1,000 hitchhike rides, slept everywhere from like mansions to the back of a lorry, like back of Bulgarian lorries to gas stations. Like we'd done so much and it kind of felt like we were pushing and pushing to reach this goal, but actually, and I think this was a really poignant lesson for me in life, was like sometimes we set a goal, but life changes and we're always evolving and we're always changing. So what my goal was 3 years ago actually doesn't stand anymore. And it felt like we were travel blogging as well. We kind of felt like if we don't do this, we failed. Like how are we going to post on the blog? Like we didn't do it. Like we've always been promoting. We're hitchhiking to India. And then I kind of felt, you know what? Isn't it more of a beautiful message to realize we're not failing? Like we're just changing our path. If anything, we're succeeding because we're listening to what we actually want.
Yeah.
And I think that was such a beautiful lesson for me to just again surrender and say, look, we're not doing this. We're flying to India and we're going to spend our time there because that's what feels right. Um, yeah. So we
Yeah.
made it, but in a slightly roundabout way to how we began.
Yeah, and do you know what? But before when we were chatting, before we came on air, and we were talking about the surrendering to strangers' kindness. That for me is so poignant because you hear about these random acts of kindness that go on around the world in such a shitstorm that's going around at the minute and has done for the past few years. So when you said that phrase, I was like, oh my god, that is something that is incredible and incredibly powerful as well because there are, as I said, there are so many people out there that will do these random acts of kindness or so much kindness in the world in such a dark time at the moment. And sometimes you have to go looking for it. So most of the time, it comes and finds you. And I find that it's so lovely when it does because it really boosts your mood. You can, if it's someone helping someone with their shopping. Or if so, just anything like that is just so amazing. So the fact that you got through from Amsterdam to the border of Iran just on the random acts of kindness of people is unreal. Unbelievable, mate.
Sure. I'm a massive believer in like what you project is what you'll receive. So when people used to say to us like, weren't you scared? What if this happened? What if that happened? And I'm not saying that no bad things can happen to good people because they can, but as a general rule, like I feel what I give out to the world is what I'll get back. And I practice this in my daily life as well. And it can work on the flip way. Like if I wake up and I'm feeling like, oh, it's going to be such a shit day, or like projecting this bad stuff, more bad stuff tends to happen to me. And I think we spoke about this earlier. It's just with like this kindness and this like bringing the niceness to your life, or trust in the universe, or whatever it is. It's like bridging this gap between like spirituality and science. And there is such a kind of
Yeah.
crossover point which I really like to sit in because it makes so much sense. Like our brain is processing millions of pieces of information a second, and we can only allow a very small percentage of that into our actual life. So therefore, what we focus on in
Yeah.
terms of, are we going to be safe? Are we going to be kind? Are we going to attract kindness? That's what you're manipulating your brain into focusing on, and therefore it happens more to you. And when we travel, that's what we do. We just surrender and be like, the next person that's going to pick us up is going to be great. Or like, I can't wait for the people we're going to meet today. And there'd be the days where, a random man would put you up on the side of the road, and the next thing you know, you're like at his home with his family. You've spent a week living with them, and then you move on and do your next thing. And yeah, I feel so grateful, so grateful. One, for the experience of, we think we crossed like 27 countries by land, and also just for every single person that helped us along the way. Like it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, mate, it's restored my faith in humanity. It really has. But we were saying again previously that some of that also then came along with some of the insecurities that were rebrought back up whilst you were traveling. So, can you tell us a bit about that and your how you were able to deal with it?
Yeah, I think I reached a stage of feeling, this was before going to India. It was when we were in Turkey for 3 months. My favorite country, I reckon, that we traveled in, by the way. Um, And I guess it kind of makes sense now when I'm saying that that's when we decided not to carry on this goal because we were tired. But I started to just feel like, I guess, a bit lost. I had
Mm.
such a sense of freedom. Like I was traveling, doing what I want, could wake up every day, do what I want, didn't have a job, this kind of stuff. But with this sense of complete freedom, you can also be left feeling really lost because when you have a routine or you have structure, it's easy to just kind of get by. When I wasn't really doing much, okay, other than traveling, but like I say, we were starting to take things for granted. Like every hitchhike ride that we got picked up in became less exciting. Every home we were welcomed into kind of felt less exciting because naturally, we've now been invited into hundreds of homes. Like almost like the novelty had worn off, and that sounds really ungrateful and ignorant to say, but it's just how it became in the end. Um, and it really, this kind of feeling of lost and loss brought up a lot of this stuff that I guess had always been embedded in me. Again, based around death, just kind of like, well, what am I doing with my life? Like, and what's the point of it all? Because like, I'm gonna die basically. And like I got lost in this really horrible spiral again of death anxiety of like, okay, I'm traveling, but what's the point? Because I'm gonna die one day. And it sounds really morbid and horrible and sounds weird to say it now. But that was literally my every waking thought. And it was so disturbing and um, controlling of myself. I really didn't know what to do. So it actually led to us, when we hit Iran, we decided we were actually going to come back to the UK for a little bit because I'd expressed to Lauren I was having these feelings of like, I would never call it like suicidal thoughts. I didn't want to die. If anything, it was the opposite. I wanted to live forever at this point. Like I'm going to die, but I don't want to. Everything felt really out of my control. So we came back to
Mm.
the UK to kind of ground before going to India, and this is where I just, again, like one of the things people don't talk to you about when you travel the world is like what happens when you get back. Because like for the first few weeks, you're like the hit, and everyone wants to know your stories, and like everyone wants to see you. But then, like, they're still living their own lives, and like you become a novelty again after
Mm.
a few weeks, and you're back there sitting in like the bedroom of your mum's house where you grew up, being like, I've just literally experienced things that I couldn't even tell you in words, that no one understands, and like not for what, but like now I'm just here, and it's such a strange feeling
Yeah.
to adjust back into that life.
I found that as well when I went traveling in total for about 6 months, and I had exactly the same feeling because for me, I went out and had the time of my life around Southeast Asia, and I had to come home for awful circumstances because it was around the time that I lost 3 people that were very close to me. But then when I went back out and finished that, and then you're telling your stories about what happened, and like you said, you're the new shiny penny. And then after that, the shine kind of wears off a little bit. And like you said, I remember sitting in my mum and dad's place, and I was telling them about all these incredible things, and what I'd been through, and all of the stuff, and how you just live day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, with a lot of stuff. And my mum was like, "Oh, I'd love to see the places. I'd love to see the scenery." But there was certain parts of it that I was like, even I can't get my head round some of the stuff that I'm talking about, like with the traveling and the way that it is.
Mm,
It's the best experience that I've ever had, and if I could do it again, I would drop everything in a heartbeat and do it, because I love it. I think it's so amazing, and if anyone's contemplating it, then just do it once we can, once it's safe. Then please go traveling, because it's the best experience, and it grounds you so much as well. I grew up a lot after coming back from traveling. Um, and it was amazing. It was so, so good. But like you, I felt my own insecurities out there, because you you kind of felt like, the only way that I can describe it is, you were so free and in a way lawless. I don't mean it in that word, but you were kind of lawless to what you had
mm,
recognized yourself as. Um, and for me, when I was able to do whatever I want, whenever I wanted, and how I wanted to do it, I was kind of like, yeah, it's weird getting back to society now and getting a full time job and moving into London and stuff like that. But I'm so grateful that I had those experiences previously, because now it's grounded me a lot more, as I said a minute ago. But it's also made me passionate and hungry to go out and do that on shorter trips, so I can still see the good side of it, but not have the anxiety levels of feeling lonely. Because there was quite a lot of the time, especially when I was in the Philippines, that I was genuinely on my own.
mm.
And it wasn't until I went to Bali, which was about 3 4 weeks later, that I met up with one of my other travel friends that I met beforehand, and it was so lonely. Like, if you get in a good group and you're able to, and it's in one of the hot spots like Thailand or Cambodia or Vietnam, those types of places, then it was great. But unfortunately for me, I went to an island which was apparently a couple's retreat for a honeymoon. So me on my own wasn't doing very well there.
Not many people up for making friends out there.
Oh, mate, but no, I completely understand what you were saying there about the anxiety side of it as well. But you came back, and now this is the bit that I absolutely love. You are living on a narrowboat. Please tell us all about that, because I love this.
Yeah, so just to kind of fast track through, I guess I came back and then actually ended up going to India for another year. And that's where I kind of really solidified a lot of my beliefs, solidified, kind of cured my all my, without sounding too dramatic, like all my insecurities and my death anxiety, just just learning more about the cycle of life and accepting the cycle of life, because India is such a wonderful place for that, because they're so in touch with life and death. Nothing in India is taboo. Like you're on the forefront of everything. And one particular book I read that I just always like to share is a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And that is the book that I say is like the book that saved my life, because it completely solidified to me and explained to me the practical steps of how I'm not my mind and I can do anything I want and I can create my own reality, which are kind of the three rules I live by, which I know we're kind of like slightly time conscious here, but that's what shifted me to after India, realizing, okay, what do I want to do with my life? So we came back from India and I kind of liked at the beginning of each year to set some kind of like New Year's resolution, manifestation, intention, whatever you want to call it. And that year was going to be, I'm going to become financially stable by what running my own business. Had no idea how that was going to happen, by the way. And I was gonna like find a stable place to live, because Lauren and I had been traveling together for the best part of 5 or 6 years, and, there was loads of factors, like we were a couple, therefore we didn't always have our own space, especially in the way we traveled of like being hosted a lot, volunteering, living in our tent, like we didn't have our base. We developed a lot of hobbies and we learned so many skills around the world. And like you learn these skills and you're like, I can't wait to do that, like when I get back. But for us, there was never a getting back. It was always the next place. There was never like an end goal of this travel. So all of this stuff was kind of brewing and cultivating that we felt we needed our own space, where we can practice a lot of the things we've learned and just kind of lay down a foundation for the next stage of our life. Like it's so easy when I remember the first year or two of traveling, we'd be like, we're going to travel forever, like forever, like nothing's going to stop us. Why would you ever stop traveling? And again, similar to the hitchhiking story, you reach a point and you're like, actually, it's okay. I do want to stop traveling. Like again, that one goal I set myself isn't actually the case anymore. So we diverted path, came back. We were living with my mother-in-law, and then COVID hit, and we were kind of blissfully enjoying living there anyway because we hadn't seen them in years. Laura and my partner really wanted to spend time with family, so we were enjoying the lockdown there. But we were a bit like, "What the hell are we gonna do with our life? Like, we can't get a job because it's COVID, we've got no money, like, what are we gonna do?" And it was actually my mother-in-law who's, one of her friends lives on a boat, and she'd been to see him for, like, I don't know, a socially distanced walk or whatever, and then she's come back and she was like, "I think you 2 would really like living on a boat, like, it really suits you." And at first I was like, "Oh, kind of interesting," didn't think much of it. And then she'd like say it a few times, and it led me into this rabbit hole of looking up narrowboats and the boating community and this kind of lifestyle. And I just
Yeah.
absolutely was infatuated by it. Like the two things we really wanted to do was have our own base, but still travel. And that seemed like such an
Mm.
undoable concept at the time because it was either traveling or move back to England. And we were like, hold on a minute, a narrowboat is a home that can move. So we can have all of our stuff in one
Yeah.
place and still travel around the UK, like our own country that we didn't know much about. So yeah, we wanted one, didn't really know how we were gonna do it. I felt like, okay, I really now need to set up a business and get it going. And gratefully, again, through determination and passion, I've done that now. So we're able to live on this boat, both working from the boat, self-employed. And we I always open to talk about this, but we took a bank loan for the boat because we didn't have the money to buy it outright. So we took out a £25,000 loan, and we now pay back, it's around £500 a month between us, which is so good because we were looking into renting somewhere and we could only find rent that was higher than £500 a month. And at the end of it, we wouldn't have owned the rented property, if that makes sense. So we were like, okay, it's £250 a month each to live on the boat, and within 5 years, the boat's ours, and then we have this asset that's worth like £30,000. So it seemed like a no-brainer, and we did it, and kind of like the traveling, knew not much about it, went full steam ahead, and now we've been living on the waterways for about 6 months, and I can't imagine right now another way of life, really.
Yeah, mate, and I absolutely love that as well because usually the conventional route is that you'll look for a flat or a house or apartment or something like that. But I love the fact that it's the outside the box thinking and that you can still travel with it as well because I think that's the big thing is that once you're in a home or a flat or apartment, like I said, you'd use those luxuries as holidays where actually
Mhm.
you could just go off whenever you wanted to and you could be in another town or another city, another part of the country. I love it. I love every second of that. And you've also turned it into a podcast as well, haven't you?
Yes, I run a podcast called the Floating Home Podcast. You can find it all on my Instagram. My Instagram's adam.floatinghome. And it started that I was just kind of documenting boat life. But I do feel really like what actually happened was I'd get a lot of people messaging me on Instagram, kind of in a kind way saying they were very jealous or envious of my lifestyle. And it really started to sit not well with me because my reply would always be like, I'm nothing special. Like, don't be jealous or envious of me. I've not done anything. And that's including hitchhiking across the world that no one else can do. Okay, now COVID's slightly different, but like nothing. I have no superpowers. I had no money. I was never hand fed anything. I've never been on benefits or anything like that. I've just said I'm going to do this, and I've done it. Same with living on a boat. The same with deciding I wanted to be self-employed. Like it's just that full belief, like I spoke about earlier. If you only let your brain focus on these things you want to happen, then your brain can't focus on anything else. And it's something I'm so passionate about because I really want everyone to be living their full human potential and their full happiness state they can reach. Um, so yeah, when you say this out of the box thinking, for sure it is, but we all have this out of the box thinking, but we just don't do it because we have the fear of what might
Mhm.
go wrong and what this and what that. And the longer we dwell on fear, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years past, and everything was just a distant dream that never happened. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's my
Mate,
speech.
yeah, no, I absolutely no, mate, I love it though. I love it because for me, like I said, I've always been someone that loves to travel and see either different parts of the world or the country or something like that. So for me, I'm like, especially with COVID, I'm like, I'm in my one bedroom flat in London, which I love. Don't get me wrong, but I would love to be out in a bit more nature and seeing a few
Mm.
things. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Just tell us again where we can find the podcast, where we can find the blog, where we can find your Instagram. Tell us everything.
Yeah, sorry, I deviated there. You just reminded me. So with this whole thought pattern, it made me think I wanted to start my own podcast to share about creating your own reality, share people's stories, share people's mindsets. So the podcast is all around that. I get really cool guests on. Some guest people, other people that live on boats, because everyone's always interested in what type of people live on boats, to motivational speakers, recovering addicts, wide range of people. Your cousin Alex, amazing episode that's going to be released soon. You can find it. It's called the Floating Home Podcast. You can find it on Spotify or Buzzsprout, but all of it gets promoted through my Instagram, which, as I said, is adam.floatinghome. And there you can see like daily life of living on a boat and me rambling on about controlling your own mind.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that I got you on the show because it's such a unique story. I think your story, and that's what really intrigued me about it. And thank you again for being so open and honest, especially about your dad, which I'm really appreciative of. So, mate, thank you so much. And wherever you are in the country, hopefully I'll be able to catch up with you. And
For sure. Whenever you want, mate, you're welcome over to the boat.
perfect. Thank you so much, mate. See you again soon.
No worries. See you later.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications, and I'll see you in the next video.